friends, to another exciting episode of A VGM Journey. And I'm your host, The Messenger. The track that we're playing in today's show is Legacy of Goku 2 from the game Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku 2, and that was composed by Yannis Brown and requested by Muddle Madness. This week on the show, we're going to focus on Game Boy Advance music, and also Game Boy Advance music that is requested by you, the listener. So I don't normally play in shows with a listener request, and I don't usually play out shows with a listener request as well, but I will be doing that on this show. And why Game Boy Advance? Well, we're going with that because the Game Boy Advance just turned 20 this past week, and I love that system so much. And I'm actually going to play all Game Boy Advance tracks next week as well with my own personal favorites. But this week, I wanted to play stuff from you guys, and you guys really pulled through. So I do want to say thank you, Muddle Madness, for that track. This next track is coming from my good friend Lee Tyrrell, the host of the Sound Test. And he wanted me to play something from Wario Land 4. This is Hall of Hieroglyphs, and it was composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi. That track that you just listened to, that was Hall of Hieroglyphs from the game Wario Land 4. It was composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi, and it was requested by Lee Tyrrell. So thank you, Lee, for that awesome track. Wario Land 4 is a game that is totally up my alley, but I've somehow missed. And I'm actually trying to rectify that because I recently got myself a copy of the game, but I don't want to play it just yet because I'm still playing through Wario Land 3, even though I've taken a little bit of a break from that. And from my understanding of Wario Land 4 is it goes back to the normal level structure somewhat of like classic side scrollers, and what I mean by that is it moves away from the, I guess I would say, puzzle-like elements that were in Wario Land 3, and that Wario is not invincible like he is in Wario Land 3, and that he has a health system. And it actually does have some ideas of its own, which would later be used in Wario Land Shake It for the Wii, where you would play through a level, get to the end, but then you have to backtrack to the beginning of the level, and you have to be quick. And I've heard a few different songs from Wario Land 4, and they've always kind of come across as odd, but it has its own charming style to it, which I feel like it paved the way for the sound of the WarioWare series. It's really hard to describe it, but when you hear it, you know it. I want to say, once again, Lee, thank you for that track. This next track is coming from, and I really hope I don't butcher your name, but it's Wisla Vlanesh, and he wanted me to play something from Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and he kind of gave me free reign a little bit on some tracks, and he even wrote a little bit of a message, and I decided to go with this track that he says that it's his favorite, which is Offense and Defense. This next track will be Offense and Defense from Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and it was composed by Soshiro, Hokkai, and Michiru Yamane. That track that you just listened to, that was Offense and Defense from the game Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and it was composed by Soshiro, Hokkai, and Michiru Yamane. And this was also requested by Visual Vinesh. Thank you, and I really hope I didn't butcher your name. He had this to say about it. People actually hate this soundtrack, and I get why, but I love all of it for those reasons. It's very discordant, has no problem sitting in a lengthy section and heavy dissonances. It's in the title, and I think they took it to heart. There is nothing but dissonant harmonies, lol. Yes, I really just said lol. And yeah, the sound is very old, original Game Boy quality instruments, but I love that too. It's like a meaty NES soundtrack. It has some really amazing tracks though, particularly Successor of Fate, also known as Juiced Belmont's theme, and my most favorite track, Offense and Defense. It just doesn't let up. Oh, and I have to add Aqueduct of Dragons right up there. Stupid soundtrack is way too good. Well, I will agree with you that I actually think this sounds pretty good too. And I dig a lot of these early Game Boy Advance soundtracks where they have an 8-bit sound to them, but I guess quote unquote better, because one of my favorite Game Boy Advance soundtracks, Game & Watch Gallery 4, is kind of the same way, where it does sound like a beefed up Game Boy 8-bit sound. So the meaty NES soundtrack comment, I mean, I definitely could agree with you there. It has that sound. And I can't really talk too much about this game just because I've never played any of the Game Boy Advance Castlevania games. And I want to say they generally kept going with the Metroidvania style that Symphony of the Night had, where you're just going through just this big wide open area and you have like these different sections and you can't progress through the game without finding new abilities. I'm assuming it's more of that. And these soundtracks, though, I think they're really good. So once again, thank you for that track. We're going to jump from one Konami game to another. And this request is coming from John Harrington, one of the hosts of Game That Tune. And he wanted me to play something from Konami Crazy Racers. This is Time Trial Results, and it was composed by Sōtarō Tojima. Track that you just listened to, that was Time Trial Results from the game Konami Crazy Racers, and that was composed by Sōtarō Tojima and requested by John Harrington. So thank you, John, for that track. Konami Crazy Racers is one of those games that I wasn't really too familiar with until somewhat recently, and after hearing a few different shows talk about the game, and I even watched some gameplay footage for it, and I think it looks really cool because I really like Mario Kart Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance, and this looks pretty similar to that. And what's pretty amazing about Konami Crazy Racers is that they have characters from all kinds of different Konami series, which they have characters from Castlevania and Metal Gear Solid and Goemon. And I want to say that you could play as the Vic Viper from Gradius, which is pretty cool. And this was another soundtrack that was a very early GBA launch game. And it has that beefed up 8-bit sound, just like that Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance track that we played right before this. And it's something that I definitely want to check out and possibly try. So once again, John, thank you for that track. This next track is once again by a listener. This time it's Carly Selesky, and she wanted me to play something from Spyro Orange. This is Snow Steps, and it was composed by Martin Schioeler. That track that you just heard, that was Snow Steps from the game Spyro Orange. It was composed by Martin Schioeler, and it was requested by Carly Selesky. So thank you, Carly, for that track. That's going to just about do it for the show this week. If you like what you've been listening to, have your friends check out the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever podcatching service that you can think of. I'm more than likely going to be on there. You can email the show at vgmjourney@yahoo.com. And you could also check us out on Twitter at VGMJourney. We also have a Discord server for the show, which I will provide a link for it in the show notes, where you could hang out with your fellow VGM journeymen and talk about games and music and even look at cool art. I've also launched a Patreon for the show, which I will also provide a link for that in the show notes. And I would really love your donations. So you could pledge to the $3 tier and gain access to a VGM side quest, a monthly bonus show that I do with my fiance Carly, who requested that Spyro Orange track. And we talk about games and music and not look at cool art. I don't think we're going to do that. And we also have a $5 tier where it will gain you a shout out for the show. And I'll be shouting out the following people. First, I would like to shout out Muddle Madness. So thank you, Muddle. I also want to shout out John, Jesse, Johnny, and David from Game That Tune. And I also want to shout out The Last Rican from VGM Fight Club. So thank you guys for your pledges. We're going to play things out with one more track, and this is coming from Hammock, the host of KVGM The Last Wave. I didn't forget about you. And he wanted me to play this track from Summon Night Swordcraft story. It's Glad, Happy, and it was composed by Kiyohiro Sada, Minako Adachi, and Kōhei Matsuok. Have a good week, everyone.